Beep, 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 beep. Right. Hello, all of you lovely persons. How are you? Let's adjust this slightly. There we are, let's see. Just slightly. Join the Warrior Teacher Programme, buy me a coffee, Substack, the usual. Today, I'm going to see some inflatables. I'm being dragged along by a youngling to an exhibition of inflatables. I'm quite looking forward to it, actually. I've been out for a while, you know. Always good to get away in it. No, not inflatable sex dolls. Your minds are like sewers. Do you know? I had one of those once, you know, in the midst of passion. In the midst of passion. I gave him a love bite and he farted and flew out the window. Never getting another one. All right, enough with the jokes. We got some serious stuff going on today. Let's give you this. This is from an article in the Times. I was hopping mad, as you can imagine, when I read it. But, you know, cooler minds and all that. Now it's a different day and I've had a chance to read it again. Maybe my initial outburst was right. Maybe my initial outburst was wrong, but I'll leave that final judgment up to you. Tougher transgender guidance for schools is unlawful, Sunak told. So where are you, peeps, on this one? Have a look at the. In the Dubras, you'll see it's an article from the Times there. I'll see if I can get an archive for you. At the moment, I can't. It's on a one of those free things, whatever they call it, free thing. So here we go from Stephen Swinford, the political editor, on Tuesday, July the 18th. There is, in fact, a good tweet thread by Stephen that he's put in. So I will find the tweet thread and also put that in the Dubras for you. Let's begin. Rishi Sunak is expected to delay issuing transgender guidance for schools after the Attorney General and government lawyers warned the plans to strengthen it would be unlawful. A Whitehall source said that Number 10 and Kemi Badenoch, the Women and Equalities Minister, wanted the guidance to be hardened amidst pressure. Shall it be amid or amidst pressure from Tory MPs? The draft guidance stated that children should be allowed to socially transition with the consent of their parents, meaning that they could choose another pronoun or name and wear the uniform of the opposite sex. That's totally clueless, isn't it? Allowing that to happen. We know from the Cash Review. Am I just repeating myself at this point? We know from the Cash Review, don't we? Social transition is iatrogenic, it's harmful. It is a psychosocial intervention. Teachers are not qualified to do so, and parents even less so. But the government then commissioned legal advice from Victoria Prentice, who I thought was in Dallas, of all things. What's up with me? Victoria Prentice, the Attorney General, about whether a ban on social transitioning in schools was possible. Last week, she concluded that such a move would be unlawful and said that the government would need to pass new legislation if it wanted to go further. Sunak had committed himself to publishing the guidance by the end of this week. But the Times has been told that it is unlikely to given the Attorney General's advice. The Prime Minister is concerned about the long-term implications of allowing children to socially transition. You and me both, Sunak. A government source said, "We have consistently said this is about protecting children, empowering parents and supporting teachers and school leaders by providing guidance for them to implement. It's a complex and sensitive area and it's right we get it right. More information is needed about the long-term implications of allowing a child to act as though they are the opposite sex and the impact that may have on other children too." Can you believe that this is a conversation that is taking place? Can you believe it? I can't get the fantasy out of my head. I mean, maybe that's the same for you, but I can't get the fantasy out of my head. Right? There is nothing complex and sensitive about this area. Right? It's only complex and sensitive if you think about it in terms of, oh, there's people who should be allowed to do whatever they want. It's not complex and sensitive. Right? It's only complex and sensitive when we don't make a declarative statement about the fact that the long-term implications of allowing a child to act as though they are the very earthly embodiment of Darth Vader, and the impact they may have on other children too. The long-term implications of allowing a child to act as though they are the singing nun. It doesn't. I don't see it any differently. I'm the opposite sex. I'm Napoleon. I'm Darth Vader. I'm the singing nun. I'm the resurrection of Ulma Kogan. Honestly, I can't see it. Can you see it? Is there any difference? I'm Napoleon. Right now, this is as of tomorrow. Jane here will be Napoleon. Right? Jane will be Napoleon, and she'll be using the gender-neutral Waterloo. Stop it. Okay, so I can't. Why are they complicating this? We're in a situation now where our government, because of a law that is designed to protect us all, cannot implement the safeguarding measures needed to prevent the iatrogenic harm of trans ideation and gender identity ideology in queer theory. The very law that is supposed to protect us in terms of not being, mistreated and all that nonsense, is because of its nuances and a lie that was told in 2004 that it is possible for someone to change their sex and live as the other sex. The lie of the Gender Recognition Act has now put us in a situation where we cannot implement basic safeguarding of children in schools. Now tell me that doesn't need primary legislation. Tell me that we don't start saying, but the second your child starts spouting that they're non-binary or that they're transgender, it is a safeguarding red flag the size of Alaska. I've said this before. But oh, what a tangled web, in that we passed a law in 2004 which builds into the law a fantasy, a falsehood, a lie. And now in 2023, we find ourselves in a situation where that lie has caught us somewhat wanting. The inability to pass safeguarding guidance, an inability driven by a lie, the ultimate lie. So what does that mean? A Whitehall source said that Number 10 and Badenoch had put forward a series of proposals to strengthen the guidance. The strongest, and a reflection of the government's concerns, was a blanket ban on social transitioning. That's it. That's it. Social transitioning describes the process by which transgender children or adults adopt a name, pronouns, and gender expressions such as clothing and haircuts that match their new gender identity. So in other words, social transitioning is slapping a social stereotype on a child based on, hard right values of what masculine and feminine, or what a man and a woman should be. So they're using gender itself to enforce it upon children. You think you're a girl? This is how a girl dresses. So they're using gender stereotypes to enforce it on children. We can't stop them because of the initial lie. Prentice said, this is the legal bod, Prentice said that a blanket ban would be unlawful. And here's where I'm Stephen Swinford. Stephen, you've done a great article here with one massive exception, which I'm going to point out to you now because it drives me mad and people do it all the time, so I don't blame you. It's not the Equalities Act, it's the Equality Act. There's no Equalities Act, Stephen. Sorry. See me after. No, there's not, Stephen. Honestly, there's not. So you need to put that right, please, if you would, in the article. There's no such thing as the Equalities Act. Prentice said that a blanket ban would be unlawful because the Equalities Act, Stephen, states that gender reassignment is a protected characteristic regardless of age. That was a mistake, wasn't it? She gave the same advice when ministers asked whether there could be a ban on social transitioning for primary school children. Badenoch said, right, and also advised ministers that you can't. There's a caveat. This is so moronic. It's unbelievable. What Kemi Badenoch wanted to say is that you cannot, or you must not. A teacher must not be forced to speak the utterances of these mad lunatics. So the teacher should not be forced to say she when it's a he, or use pronouns that aren't related to the reality of the individual, or anything of that nature. And the legal bods have said, well, I need a caveat in there that says should, that nobody should, not must, nobody must be compelled, and that nobody should be compelled unless there was a particular justification. There is no justification. The law is wrong. The law is saying that there's a justification for unreality. There is a justification for the living in a world of a deluded individual and enforcing that deluded world on the rest of us. It's a big fat no from me. A big fat no. Badenoch also suggested that doctors must be consulted before allowing children to socially transition as part of a clinical gateway. Well, are you telling me that children... Well, I know. Are you telling me that children are being socially transitioned without a diagnosis? Then who's diagnosing them? The parents? The teachers? Who's diagnosing these children with a serious mental condition? Badenoch asked, well, there needs to be a doctor's diagnosis. Again, the Attorney General suggested that guidance would need to say that they should be consulted, not that they must. You see how fine this becomes on a lawful footing when you look at the argot of the language of law. How lawful on a lawful footing. There's conversations I've had already last night, which were just very brief, saying, we can't get rid of the GRA barrier even though you want to. We can't do X, Y, Z. And these are lawful, these are people who are embedded in the law, and I'm going to obviously go with their greater experience than with my own just get rid of it. But I'll remain the bookend, if you don't mind. The Department of Health said that the NHS would not be able to provide enough doctors and clinical support to advise on whether children should be able to socially transition. So there are so many children that are now wrapped up in this cult that the NHS, which is the public body that is tasked with making us all well, would be unable to cope if they opened the floodgates. But it's not being taught in schools. But teachers aren't telling kids it's okay. But it isn't being socially spread like a virus online. None of that's happening, but the NHS couldn't cope. How is this happening then? The Attorney General said that if the government wanted to go further on trans guidance for schools, it would need to consider putting it on a statutory footing. Prentice herself is said to favour taking a tougher approach on the guidance. So the Attorney General, who is saying, you can't do it, right, you can't do it, the law that we've got is flawed, the law that we've got is undermining child protection, is undermining child safeguarding, you can't do it. But Prentice herself, that's her, is saying, we need a tougher approach on the guidance. So she favours that tougher approach, despite obviously giving us her professional advice on exactly what the situation is. A Whitehall source told the Times, the government wants to go further, but the problem is that this is guidance. It is coming up against the Equalities Act. Simon! It's coming up against the Equality Act. Stephen, sorry, not Simon. It's coming up against the Equality Act. If the government wants to go further, it has to change the law. Right, now, there have been claims, it says here in the article, which is obviously important, of differences of opinion between Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, and Badenoch. Keegan has emphasised the importance of trans rights. And why? Gillian, what are you talking about? Ugh! And said that it would be unreasonable to stop children from socially transitioning, providing there is parental consent. Parents are not informed enough. Parents are not capable, unless, of course, they're in the business. Parents are not capable of making a diagnosis of this dangerous, iatrogenic, socially contagious disease that is akin to some kind of weird, perverted, gone round the bend anorexia, or bulimia, or self-harm. Okay? What's wrong with Keegan? What's wrong with the woman? Is she suffering from righteous cause mentality, do you think, and narcissistic compassion? But be kind. Be kind. Let's not be kind. Let's be realistic about child protection, please. Safeguarding. Keegan told... Oh, sorry, hang on a minute. Badenoch has repeatedly advocated a tougher approach and has called for the guidance to be robust. I think if they're going to have to go to law to change this, then we need to be more than robust. We need to clean house completely. But that's just me. Keegan told the Times last month, it's a tricky subject, but I think parental consent is the key driver for this. No, I disagree entirely. I consent, said the parent, to you telling my child that they are so fat they need to starve themselves, even though their waist is 21 inches. I consent, says the parent, to you making sure that somebody's there when my child throws up her lunch because she's got bulimia, because she is fat and she just needs to keep throwing up. What's Keegan talking about? I consent to you providing what's needed for my daughter to self-harm. Keegan is unfit for purpose at this point. Unfit for purpose. Get her out. Give it to Miriam Cates. Or Kemi. I don't care which. Right, so she said, just to repeat this, tricky subject, but I think parental consent is the key driver for this. Schools aren't there as doctors or parents. They are there as educators. Parental consent is the most important thing. Parents are responsible for their child. Parents don't get to consent to harm their child. Parents are under safeguarding just as much as anybody else is. After all, parents are, the ones most likely to harm their kids, aren't they? It's a horrible fact, but it's true. Because purely by dint of being who they are. Some Tory MPs have raised concerns about the guidance. Miriam Cates, as we know, doing great work in this arena, the Tory MP for Penistone. I have to make sure I pronounce that right. Miriam Cates from Penistone. What is a Penistone? A low hum. Penistone and Stocksbridge, how I wish that was Coxbridge, recently said that the guidance risked becoming an unethical, population-level social experiment. That's exactly what it is. A spokeswoman for the Attorney General's office said by long-standing convention reflected in the ministerial code whether the law officers have been asked to provide legal advice and the content of any advice is not disclosed outside government without their explicit consent. The consent is rarely given. What that last bit says, and I think it's really important that Stephen has highlighted this in his article, is that normally these kinds of mechanics of what's going on here, which is the lawful side of it, the bringing in individuals to say, well, is this lawful? What can be done? Is not normally something that's revealed to the public because it isn't, right? Most people haven't got time to be bothered, but in this case they've done it, and they've done it for a particular reason, and they've done it for the particular reason saying, this is we've got a problem here with the law. The Gender Recognition Act 2004, in acting with the Equality Act, Equalities is not there, Stephen, it's Equality Act, is in fact enabling a child safeguarding disaster. It is enabling a countrywide social experiment on children. Me, repeal the GRA, get out of the Equality Act. Others, we need to really hone down what this means, put the gatekeeping in, find out where the point is. This is what we do. We learn from our mistakes. This is a mistake. We're getting a kick in the ass from this mistake of putting a falsehood into law over a tangled web, right? And putting that falsehood into law. We must learn from this. We must learn from this. Because we are now seeing the kind of emotional response that gave the 2004 any credence whatsoever, and the kind of emotional nonsense we're seeing within our society is being used to shape laws and policies, and it must go. It has to stop. We need to get back to rationality, because this is just part of the problem. But it's certainly, for me, the biggest one, because I will not allow the sacrificing of same-sex attracted children and autistic children on the altar of the gender gods, because Gillian Keegan thinks it's okay. I'll see you later, people. Bye.